All right, so to get started, we're first going to look at this new feature that we get in iOS 13, which is to enable our app to adapt to dark mode. And we're also going to be looking at how to use vector assets like PDFs, which scale automatically inside our app. So here's the starting project that I've cloned. And the first thing you should do is go ahead and check out our main.storyboard. So here we've only got one screen and it's linked up to our file called weatherviewcontroller.swift. And that's the file that's going to be controlling this screen. Now you'll notice that a lot of our IB outlets are already linked. So I've already linked the condition image view, the temperature label, as well as the city label for you. And one thing to point out here is that this image view, the image that we're using in it is from something called SF Symbols. Now, SF Symbols is something that we got new as of iOS 13. So if you're creating an app that's targeting users who have iOS 13 and later, then you'll be able to use it in your app. And it's got over 1,500 symbols and images that the Apple designers have created for you to be able to freely use within your apps. And if you download the SF Symbols app, then you'll be able to browse through all of the symbols in here. Now, inside this set of symbols, they've got a whole bunch of symbols that represent all sorts of different weather conditions. That's what we're going to be using to populate our condition image view. So for example, if inside the SF symbol browser we had our eye on the cloud.rain symbol, then we could go into our app, select our image view, and you can either click on the drop down to scroll through all of the images that are in SF Symbols. Alternatively, we can simply just provide the name that we found over here, which was cloud.rain. So once I put that in there, you'll see that it's automatically scaled, fully vectorized, and it will look good on all sizes without you having to do anything yourself. And now that I've got the clouds and rain symbol, it looks a little bit more befitting of London weather. And the other really exciting thing that we get is if you take a look inside the size inspector, you'll notice that there's this part which we haven't really used much yet. We've used the size inspector for devices, for different orientation, to see how it would look in our interface builder, but we've never used the interface style. Now, let me show you what happens if I switch to the dark style. You can have certain components on screen that adapt automatically when the user changes to dark mode. What do I mean by dark mode? Well, let me show you dark mode in Xcode itself. Notice how if you go into Xcode Preferences, you can change the appearance to dark mode. And everything becomes black and it's a lot nicer in your eyes when you're working at night. Now that can be set system-wide in your Mac by going to the System Preferences and General to change to dark mode. And as of iOS 13, users will also be able to set their iPhones to have the dark appearance system-wide. So once they switch to dark mode, then we want to design for their experience in dark mode. So how do we do that? Well, when we're setting the colors for our labels or for the tint, which sets the SF Symbols colors, we can set it so that it uses one of the system colors rather than just a custom color. So you can see that if I select a custom color here by, say, using one of these random crayons, well, that looks good for this screen. That actually looks terrible, but just beside the point. If we switch to dark mode, you'll see that it doesn't change at all. But instead, if I'd used one of the system colors, system pink, system orange, or the colors that are assigned for different roles, say for the label color is usually black in the normal mode, and then it becomes white when I switch to dark mode. So be sure to have a read on the documentation around dark mode and supporting dark mode in your apps. But I want to show you a couple of cool things that you can do. Firstly, we've already seen that with these colors, as long as we set them to a system color that we find here, not things like dark gray or black color, these colors actually stay as what you've specified. If it says white color, then it's going to be white color. But instead, we want to change to label color for the labels so that it adapts automatically. But what if we wanted a custom color? Let's say that if I select my cloud and I decide to change the tint of this image to a custom color, and I'm going to base it off one which I select using the color dropper tool. So I want it to match my user interface. So I'm going to select that dark green, which looks really nice here. But notice how, because it's a custom color, it doesn't adapt anymore. Unless we go into our assets.exe assets, click on the plus button here and add a new color set. So here's our new color set, and we're going to change the appearances to include any light and dark. And now when we select each of these squares, we get to define a custom color. So let's go back to our main.storyboard, and this color that I selected here, this custom color, I want to be able to save it into my palette here. So once you've used the color dropper tool to get a hold of the color, you can click and drag that color into your color palettes to save it to use elsewhere or for later. So now if I go back to my assets.exe assets and I select on my any appearance and light appearance, I'm going to change that to that color that I selected earlier on. So when I'm in light mode, I'm going to choose the dark green, and when I'm in dark mode, I'm going to keep it as white. So now all I have to do is just to give this color set a name, and I'm going to call it my weather color, and then hit enter. Now, if I go back to my main.storyboard and I select this image view, I'm going to change the tint from my custom color that I created just now to this brand new named color that I've created called weather color. So now that I've selected that, when I switch to dark mode, you can see that it changes to white. But we don't have to stop there. We can do even more. So notice how we've included two images here, dark background.pdf and light background PDF. Wouldn't it be nice to change the background image depending on which mode the user is in, light or dark? Well, we can do that quite easily. Now, the reason why we haven't added these into the assets folder is because I wanted to use it to show you that you can also use these vector images or PDF images, because up till now, we've only been using scalar images like PNGs or JPEGs. And the problem with these images is if I go ahead and show you this background image, which is background.png, if I go ahead and zoom into it, you can see that very soon it becomes pixelated, right? Especially when it's displayed in a large screen. So how can we fix that? Well, that's the reason why we have these 3x, 2x, and 1x image sizes, so that we can create the images in all the different sizes that are needed by the app. But there's another way of doing this. We could also simply use vector images. With vector images, when you zoom in on them, they don't actually pixelate, because it uses math to work out where each of these lines need to go and how they should appear, so they always stay sharp no matter how much you zoom into it. So in order to use these images, we're going to replace our background image, which currently is a PNG image file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and delete it. And instead, I want to use my light background.pdf. So I'm simply going to click and drag it into place. And now, because I'm using a vector image, I have to check this checkbox to say that it should be resized to preserve my vector data. And then I'm going to change the scales from individual scales to a single scale. Because now that I have a vector image, I don't need 1x, 2x, and 3x. It can be resized using this vector image for all the different sizes. Now, in addition, I want to have a different background image depending on whether if it's in light mode or dark mode. So if you go to the appearances drop down here, change to any light and dark, we can now specify a different image. So for the light appearance, I'm going to have this one. So I can just copy and paste it into the box. And then for the dark appearance, I'm going to drag on this dark background.pdf. And now you can go ahead and delete these two PDFs from here. The only reason why we included it there was just to be able to show you that you can simply drag it in to these slots. If you had it in your Finder or in your downloads or another folder, it would work exactly the same way. Now that we've got our background for light and dark, let's go and check it out. So in our main.storyboard, when we're in the light interface style, you can see that it's the trees and mountains. And when I change to the dark interface style, it becomes mountains and moon and stars and clouds. So you can see that it looks completely different now. And that's kind of neat. So if you zoom in on the view controller in main.storyboard, you'll wonder to yourself, hey, didn't Angela say that this was meant to be a vector and it was not meant to look blurry? Well, inside the main.storyboard, they have a fixed size image that they've chosen. But as soon as you run this on your simulator or on a physical device, no matter what size phone you have or iPad, the background is going to remain sharp. So if you compare this image that I've got running in my simulator versus the one that's at about the same size in my main.storyboard, you can see the difference in sharpness. So now that we've seen how to create dark mode enabled apps and use vector assets inside our app, as well as learning about the SF symbols that we can use, we're ready to move on to the next lesson where we're going to learn about the UI text field and be able to start giving our app some inputs.